Hi, welcome to DNT, Default Network Training, the Academy, Summer Academy by the Kaiser Neuro Map Institute in order to understand default network training and brain mapping in particular. And today, this is going to be an unusual one because you're going to see a much more interesting model or theory that you've probably never encountered in EEG before. All right, so we record people, 19 channels. That's a cap there by Vincent. He's got probably like 64. We don't have to use that many. All right, well, you get a referential montage. Now, referential montage is great. That's just the actual raw signals. That's looking at 10 seconds of time there. There's 19 channels, frontal poles, frontal, temporal, central, temporal, parietal, and occipital. And the number, if it's even, it's on the right side, odd on the left, and Z is midline 0. Okay, so the thing is, you can see artifacts very good because you want to make sure you're doing acquiring or analyzing. You can acquire whatever you get, but analyze only that which is from the cerebrum, which is the cortical signal, the brain giving the signal, not the eyes or the jaw muscles or the scalp. So you can easily see, most readily should see artifacts in the referential, but to do analysis for interpretation, you want to clean it in the referential, but it's a surface signal, and you got to do some steps. And the reason why you got to do steps is this is showing you a model of how these surface signals are composites. You have multiple regions sending out signals, and they're merging together. And that's what that's trying to show, how the signals are from one channel be made up of multiple sources are connected to it. So the first thing we want to do is get a surface measure where we remove some of the composite element, and that's the Laplacian, which is just really a subtraction technique based on how the brain is inside the skull, and it's in the spheroid. So it's a kind of a 3-dimensional or 2.5-dimensional subtraction scheme. But then we got to go a little bit further and triangulate, and that's where we get the Brodmann montage. And then we're using these regions that are reasonably uniform in terms of anatomy. There's a lot of heterogeneity in there, and there's reason why we don't get down to like a millimeter is because people have different areas in their head where the regions are, but we have general areas we know where they are. So we triangulate down to those regions, and you can see different patterns there that you can't see on the surface. Okay, once we get the signal at the Laplacian level and then at the Brodmann level, we find the components. We average it up. It's all about what is the tendencies, the central tendencies. And the spectral plots, I've talked about before, we're going to talk about again today. In an eye, it's all about what condition you're recording. So if you're recording an eyes open, you're going to get different. Recording a math test, reading test, some kind of condition, playing a video game, watching a movie, you're going to get different than this goal that looks like right here. This is in the eyes closed resting condition. That's what you want. In fact, if you saw that, if someone was watching a movie, it means they're pretty bored. So you don't want to see that. In essence, this is a disengage with the environment. But we got to see it doing the eyes closed. That's what we want. Okay, and there's a lot of EEG measures. In fact, the initial analysis in skill 2 and skill 3, I should say, in skill 3 was 31 parameters. And each parameter, a lot of the parameters, not all of them, would have frequency components. So it would be theta and delta and alpha and beta and so forth, or the single hertz, 1 hertz, 2 hertz, 3 hertz. So you have all this information, and EEG is very good at the moment-to-moment changes. What's going on? As someone pays attention, gets fatigued, gets sleepy. But we want the habits. We want the brain habits, because that is the thing that tells us that where those brain habits that would lead to the brain, to the behaviors, to the habitual behaviors that can be a problem. And so we're looking for those habits that we can identify and then change. And we learn how to change them empirically. Start off with theory, but empirically we find it, so we know how to normalize any site that happens to be messed up. Yeah, but now it's we use this Kaiser Neuro Map. This was originally we had skill 3, but now with Kaiser Neuro Map we have a much more advanced understanding of what we're doing. Okay, so we're going to look at 2 parameters. We're going to look at the sensory signal, and that's just an activity measure, and then this measure of theta unity, which is a very reliable one, it's about connectivity, and it's a measure of, in essence, cortical maturation. And when you have orange or yellow, you have instinct, the subcortex controlling the person, and the cortex is not really, neocortex is not in charge, and then neocortex can be too intrusive in a way. You want to get a balance point. That's what the green is. Okay, so this is the individuals, and we're looking at 19 regions over here on the left. And you can see this person giving this alpha peak, the spectral plot, all pretty much all the same in most locations. It's an adult in their 50s, actually, so the brain's already hit the maturational maximum in essence. And then we look at the front of the head, 19 areas, the middle of the head, and the back of the head. This one's not that interesting because it's all the same. A lot of times you see a lot of more variance going on. But now this is the connectivity. Now this tells us which areas is instincts coming through, which area is acting what we call functionally transparent. If it's orange, it's functionally transparent. It's supposed to be that the neocortex, as it's involved in an area, it will start repurposing the subcortical impulses, and it will not be the same for all directions. They have different connections, different partnerships, in essence, different wiring schemes. And so if you see orange, it's like everything's the same in all directions. That means the neocortex is just letting it pass, the subcortical impulses pass through, and not repurposing them for higher goal-directed thought. So it's very, very reactive to the environment. So this individual, you can see the 38s are messed up, and that's usually a sign of the amygdala being too much in control, fight and flight being too much. Get some boundaries. We talk about this in other videos, so I'm not going to go into it much, but just show you that's a nice overview of what's going on with this person. And again, what we do is we target the orange areas, sometimes target the blue, depending if they are a problem. Sometimes blue can be a strength, but orange is almost never a strength. If it's a strength, it's professional for your professional abilities, but it won't be in your personal life because you're going to be overreacting to the environment. Too much going on there. Okay, so one thing I just want to be clear about, because you will hear in these videos sometimes when I talk about someone having like a PTSD marker or a violence marker or whatever it is, that DNT neuro markers, they're sensitive but not specific. It's not diagnostic. And in fact, what we're doing is just finding where the area is of the EEG dysrhythmia is, where the cortical limbic dysrhythmia, and we know how to fix that dysrhythmia. So it doesn't, sometimes people will use terms for people to understand, like anxiety and so forth, and social anxiety, and say this person has this issue, and there's the marker for it. But in a way, the marker, we have to sort of interpret, figure out how much the person is expressing that problem. So in a way, you can think of these markers, you're vulnerable to certain conditions. But like, for instance, if you have this what we call a PTSD marker, posterior cingulate orange, the real primary thing is loss of self-nurturing. So anything talking about developmental trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder that's emerging in this is like secondary. We're talking about how there's a dysrhythmia that we're going to fix. Now, so neuromarkers are sensitive but not specific, and a very nice of that analogy that all polar bears are white, but not all white animals are polar bears. So it's sensitive. White fur is sensitive. If you see white fur, if you're a polar bear, you're going to have white fur. But if you see white fur, it may not be a polar bear. That's not specific. Okay. So getting back to the activity. So this is an example of 3 recordings from an individual. This person went through some form of neurotherapy. You get a few changes going on there. You can see some improvement. It is hard to get knocked down. This is a delta range from like 0 to 3, 3.5, and from a 3 to 3.5 to 7, or 4 to 7 is theta. And we want all the energies in an eyes closed recording to be in the alpha range. And you can see the back head is very good, and even gets improved somewhat maybe. But we want to give it this height at the 6 realm here. But it wasn't to be done in this case. But the response system is far more important. So this thing always plays a minor player, the activity realm. It occasionally can have a problem, especially when you have these harmonics. If these rises and energies past the alpha range are high, that can be involved in things like anxiety and other forms of distress and loss of autonomy. But we really want to get in the alpha range. Okay, one of the things we take from this is like we take what is that alpha peak, or sometimes called the IAF in our field, individual alpha frequency, and you can see we get a nice little measure down to an 1/8 of a hertz. When you use this, we do the Darwin frequency table. When you look at this, it's 1 hertz resolution. So this is a nice definition of how similar the peaks are. And what does the peaks mean? And they found out many years ago that your alpha peak was coincided with just how often you your sensory system samples the world when you relax. The reason why movies exist and TV, why they go 24 and almost 30 frames a second, is because we don't go 24 frames a second. If we went 24 frames a second, they'd have to go 48 or 60 frames a second for us not to see the individual stills, not to get that kind of staccatic motion sometimes you see in Nickelodeon stills, where you can sort of sense, you can see the stills, the essence of the photographs being stills between each one. Well, what happens, we get thrown 2 or 3 frames a second, and it induces motion. We see motion when there really isn't any motion there. And that's because we sample at a certain speed, and most adults sample around 10 and a quarter. 10.3 in 1971, there was a paper, looked at a huge amount of people, found out the adults around 10.3. We see around 10 and a quarter. That's the speed, that's the median, the optimum. And it's optimum because you want to be communicating with others. You want to be going the same rate of information transaction. This is the relay, what's called a gating rate inside the brain in terms of sensory information. You want all the regions of your brain, all the areas to be going at the speed when you're in a relaxed state, and you want to be around the adult speed if you're adult. If you're a kid, you can be slower. You see adolescents will go faster. I'll show you in a moment right here, coming up. So there's been a bunch of studies that go back to the 40s showing that your PDR is that alpha rhythm in the back of the head. It's easy to see them. They've seen it. They've been studying it for almost 100 years now. And that corresponds to your sensory speed, how often you're sampling the world. And like if you have a strobe light and you synchronize it to your PDR, you would actually see it would be brightest. If you actually made it faster, so it flashed even faster, it would actually look a little less dim. It would go dim. If it was slower, it would be dim, whatever's attuned. And people have done photic stimulation studies. They've done some clever auditory studies, some illusion. This one's over here on the right shows a optical illusion, or actually it's a sound illusion with vision. And how it relates to your ILF. This is your IAF, your alpha peak is your sampling rate. Now, why is the problem going slower or faster? Well, the problem about going slower or faster is that you can then misunderstand. You are not sharing the same situation sometimes, especially if the environment's noisy. You know, you're not going to hear, or if someone's talking at a rate that you're not in that range, you can misunderstand things or get lost. And this just shows you a little visual narrative of how, for instance, I use 10 frames for the entire night, sort of to correspond to like 10 hertz, and how that's a person who has insomnia. And you can see occasionally they're sleeping, most of the time they're awake. And someone who's going slower gets a slightly different story. In fact, someone goes very slow may get the entirely wrong story. This one's sort of the correct story, or closer to the correct, about insomnia. This one's sort of a weird story, like the person woke up in the middle of the night. But this one looks like they slept right through. Well, that's not the truth. This is the closest to the story. So when we are sampling at a different rate from others, our communications and other kinds of understanding is going to be, we can have frame loss, we can have problems, friction in our ability to understand someone if they're going faster, too much faster, too slower than we are going, which is why we want to go 10. And we have found out with people who, as they head towards 10 hertz, if they've been slower, as some adults have been slower, or even kids, they get more social. It seems to get more social. It seems to be, if you're down in the 8 hertz range, you're more egocentric, even id-centric in a way as you get slower and slower. If you get faster, you're kind of adolescent. Like the idea of someone's going to take care of you kind of feeling an adolescent has.